Well, let's move ourselves into Genesis.
Yep, we go.
We're in chapter 27, verse 46. Ready to get into it?
Oh, yeah.
All right,
Oh, yeah.
cool. So here we have Rebekah and Isaac having a conversation that Esau should have been part of, I think. Right? Rebekah, this is the second time she's weary of her life. The first time was when she was pregnant. And this is not weary of her soul or her existence. That would be the word nephesh. It's worry of the experiences of her life. So the word is chai, I think. I'm weary of my life because of these Hittite women. So we know who she's referring to. Esau married 2 Hittite women. Right? If Jacob marries one of the Hittite women, such as these, one of the women of the land, what good will my life be to me? So then Isaac sends him back to Paddan Aram, to the house of Bethuel, your father's mother. This is Haran. We knew it in the days of Abraham as Haran, but he's sending him back. So let's at least pull the curtain back on this story just a little bit, because this is Rebekah's presenting argument to Isaac is, we cannot have Jacob marry these Hittite women. But what's the real reason?
Well, the real reason is the preserving of Abraham's line, right? I mean,
well, yeah, because Esau wants to kill him.
That too.
Right.
Yeah. Yeah.
I mean, the previous section told us that Esau's getting ready. Like Esau has funeral plans.
Oh, yeah.
He's not going to do anything while Isaac's alive, but he has some big plans for the after party.
Yeah. It's
right.
Going to be a 2 grave ceremony.
That's right. So she gets wind of this, and I think it's probably true, right? That's what you're saying. She really doesn't like the fact that Esau married these 2 Hittite women. I'm sure they were nice enough girls. I don't know anything about them. I don't want to cast aspersions on them, but they come from an entirely different culture with an entirely different set of values, and their values that Abraham's line is trying to leave behind, and they're part of a group that's going to be displaced when Abraham finally takes the land. That's at least the promise. So lots of reasons to be suspicious of this. And so she wants Jacob to go back to her family. Seems like a good idea to Isaac. So that's kind of the setup. Anything stand out that you want to pull out of that beginning, or do you want to just move on to the trip?
Well, the same thing was for Abraham. Abraham
right.
Wanted to find a wife for Isaac, and it had to be from his own family. The Hittites obviously were not followers of God, and there was contention there. So I think, I mean, there was enough conversation about back when we talked about it with Abraham that he didn't want a local wife, should we say, for Isaac. So I think there's similarities here again. I think that are important for us to remember, closely related to some of the mistakes that Isaac and Abraham made. But this is more on a positive note, trying to find the right woman, as in any relationship, or any marriage relationship. That the right person is pretty important.
Yeah, I agree. And I don't want to get too into this because I think it's a thorny place for us to get to, but we do like to recognize themes in Genesis as we see these recurring themes. Now, I certainly think this is an inspired text, so I think these themes matter, but they're also of a different culture. So I'm not necessarily affirming the base assumption, though maybe I am. I'm going to leave that somewhat vague. Is that okay, Minister Joe?
Yeah, you could do that.
Okay. So you'll get what I sense here anyway. But this is Genesis 2:24. This is way at the beginning when God creates male and female. It's always an interesting thing because the ancient Near Eastern cultures became very patriarchal, meaning that they were very oriented around the men. And women were sometimes treated as property, sometimes as servants, very rarely as equals in the house in this culture. Now, I would say that that's not always the case in Israel. I think there were plenty of relationships that were much more egalitarian. You can see it like with Ruth and Boaz. You can see a few of these good examples. But in the ancient Near East, it's very patriarchal. In fact, at least in many of the countries of the Middle East, it remains very patriarchal, even to this day. So that's part of the culture, which makes it strange that an ancient Near Eastern text, like the scriptures, would put marriage in the way that it's put here. Therefore, a man leaves his father and mother and clings to his wife, and they become one flesh. Now, that is very countercultural to the ancient Near East, where it's the woman really leaving her family and becoming part of the man's family. So it's always struck me as interesting that it's described in this way. Now, you might say this is pre-fall, so maybe something happens in the curses of the fall that changes this. But the reason I bring it up is because there's a general theme that's repeated, and I don't think you can be a good reader of Genesis and not notice this theme. And it's the theme that who a man marries directs his course more so than hers. And I don't know why that theme is constantly repeated. I'm not casting any dispersions on women in general, but for some reason, this theme is repeated over and over again. It's here with Esau, with the Hittite women. There's more concern that he will be directed by them than that he will be able to direct them. It gets repeated in the life of Solomon, where Solomon is led astray by his foreign wives. It gets repeated in the case of Ahab, where Jezebel is mostly blamed for his leading the people into Baal worship. I don't know why that theme is repeated, but it's here in the patriarchs that the wife is extremely important to the continued holiness of the family. Extremely important. And it somehow goes back to Genesis thematically, that the man clings to her. And that's a weird thing to say in a patriarchal culture. I just think we want to observe it, that the Bible depicts women as having significant spiritual influence in the home. Significant. Whereas the basic culture thought the opposite was true. So I just want to point that out. I don't know what to make of it, but I see it here too. There's a concern among the patriarchs that the right woman is found.
And I've heard too often, not to jump too far, well, it's light years ahead, but supposedly the influence of John Wesley's mom, significant, even though his father was a church elder.
Yeah. He generally, I agree with you, in his journal speaks more of his mother's influence than his father's. At least he quotes her more often. So it might be because women raise the children in these days and so have a disproportionate influence on how the children are raised. That would be one thing. But in the scriptures, the emphasis is not just the influence on the next generation, but on the husband himself. It's very interesting. And I want to observe that theme because it's behind the story. You might think, what does it matter who Jacob marries? What does it matter who Esau marries? They're going to bring them into the covenant, right? But that's not the concern here.
Didn't work for Lot.
No, and it's going to be a concern in the garden in the law of Moses as well. That same concern will exist in the law of Moses. So it's just a theme we have to recognize. Probably the best thing for us to conclude is that the spiritual influence goes both ways. That this is a patriarchal culture, but even if the man is following a particular way, if his wife isn't and they're pulling against each other, that's going to be problematic even in this day. But I'm emphasizing the fact that the way the narratives are structured, it almost looks as though the Bible expects the woman to have a disproportionate influence on the spiritual direction of a family. And it's worth pointing that out because it does seem that even in our day, women are more inclined to take the spiritual lead. And you recognize that in the stories of the scriptures. Now, you and I could debate all day whether that's right or that's wrong or it just is, but I want to at least observe that it's here. And I'm in my own Bible reading, as you can imagine, I'm nearing the end of the year. We're getting towards December. So I am in the Pauline letters and I'm almost finished. And because I'm just reading through this time. And I've just finished Colossians, I think, today. And I'm just noticing as I'm reading through Paul's letters how prominent female leaders are. Like in Colossians, the only household that Paul gives his greetings to is a household led by a woman. And he gives his greetings specifically to her and to her household, to the church that meets in her house. Mm-hmm. And you see that in Corinthians, there are 2 women mentioned in that book. You see it in Philippians, there are 2 women mentioned in that book. You see it in Ephesians as well. It's so interesting that it seems like a disproportionate number of the households are led by women. So I'm just saying it's a recurrent theme throughout the scriptures, and quite countercultural, since these tend to be such patriarchal societies, both the ancient Near East and Rome for that matter. Certainly Judaism in the first century was very patriarchal. Just something to observe.
Right.
I'm not trying to draw any conclusions from it. Well, maybe I am, but I'm not trying to push those conclusions on anybody.
Right.
I just want to observe it. Yeah. So anyway, that's motivation to get Jacob back to Haran.
Right.
And so Isaac blesses him for his journey, which shows us that the blessing is not, it's not a once and done thing. It's not as though he blessed him with the Abrahamic blessing and he would become the heir of this promise, and then that was enough. Isaac also prays over him for his journey. And I'm very interested in these blessings because I'm wondering, Minister Joe, if you think, as I am beginning to think, that this gives us a pattern for the way to pray for our children. And I just want to take a look at this. Okay, so when I pray for my kids, I'm enculturated to ask God to protect them in various ways, right? We pray for our kids before they go to school in the morning. Mm-hmm. I often, if I'm the one praying, Jen does it a lot too, but if I'm the one praying, I ask that the Lord will soften their hearts to the things they should learn and harden their hearts to the things they shouldn't. That wickedness would be like water running over a rock, but that good teaching would soak in, become part of who they are. I'll often ask that, praying for protection and guidance, those sorts of things. But when this is Isaac's prayer, and I'd love to just talk a little bit about what you see Isaac doing here. May God Almighty bless you and make you fruitful and numerous, that you may become a company of peoples. May he give to you the blessing of Abraham, to you and your offspring with you, so that you may take possession of the land where you now live as an alien, land that God gave to Abraham. And that's when he sends him away. Now that's quite a sending prayer, wouldn't you say?
Oh, yeah. Yeah.
I don't want to push it and say this is the way we should always pray for our kids, but I want to be vulnerable and say, I don't know if I've ever prayed for my kids this way. Mm-hmm. Like, what do you see happening here? What do you think Isaac is doing? And what are the assumptions that underlie it as far as you can tell? These are the things I'd like to talk about. It's not a quiz for you. We'll engage.
Right. Well, you definitely showing continuity with Abraham's call. That's the first initial thing of numerous and a great company of people. But that and then the blessing, to bless, be a blessing to well, I don't know whether necessarily said that.
So tell me if you think this is fair. I often am asking God to do things. Isaac doesn't do that. This is not directed at God. Mm. Do you think it's fair to say that Isaac assumes God is going to fulfill his promises? There's no reason to ask him to do what he's already said he will do. Instead, this is a blessing tied to the moment, because what is Jacob going to do? He's going to Haran to find a wife. So this idea of him producing offspring is essential to the journey. So it's a very timely blessing. He blesses him with the same words that God blessed Abraham with several times, and certainly blessed Isaac with. And it's a reflection of the blessing he's already given to Jacob, right? About having offspring and becoming a company of many peoples. That's the promise to Abraham being figured forth. And it's may give to you the blessing of Abraham, to you and your offspring, so that you may take possession of the land. These are all Abrahamic promises. But Isaac in no way asked God to do this. It seems to me he assumes God is going to do it. Like there's no reason to ask God to do what he's already said. Instead, he just reminds Jacob as he goes what God's promises are. Like that's a very different way of sending than I'm accustomed to. It seems to be based on a different assumption. I mean, I'll let you dialogue with it too, but I think I assume God is not going to protect them unless I ask.
Yeah, right. Yeah, I think it's there is a realization that if they're, I mean, we're talking about our kids or
Yeah.
where we're at right now, not
If
necessarily
you were
big.
sending your son off to college or off to a long trip where you likely believe he's going to lay the foundation for his future, which is what Jacob is going off to do, what do you say to him? How do you pray for him when he goes? Or her, either way.
Yeah, I usually, in particular, my wife and I pray for his safety, pray for his ability to do his best, and that his witness will be strong as well. Those are some basic things that we talk about, and that and he's succeeded at that. I guess
Yeah.
I mean, he's got no awards and stuff like that, and so.
But do you notice how different? That's how I pray too. That would be my instinct. It's how my parents prayed for me, as at least in my presence. I don't know what they said when I wasn't there, when I went. But do you notice how different Isaac's words to Jacob upon parting are?
Yeah. Yeah, I'm not sure I exactly would be praying for my son to have as many kids as he could.
Well, I mean, that's very cultural, right? That would be the promise of Abraham. He's carrying out the promise of Abraham.
Yeah.
But this is the thing. He's not so much making requests of God, but he's reminding Jacob as he goes of God's promises.
Yeah.
So that he carries with him the promises of God, not prayers for protection. You notice how Jacob doesn't really say, I pray that you won't have any hardship. In fact, Jacob is heading right now into a ton of hardship.
Right.
This is going to be really tough. Isaac doesn't seek to try to avoid that for him. Doesn't make any requests of God that it be easy where he goes or simple or anything. What he does is the prayer he prays is not so much to God, but on God's behalf. He speaks to his son on behalf of God and pretty much says, remember the promises God has made. May the Lord fulfill what he has said in your life. That's a different way of sending.
Yeah, it's reminiscent of the what we've said before about the law. What tie it around your hand, on your right hand and on your forehead.
Yeah.
This idea of remembering, even the stones after they crossed the Jordan.
Yeah.
It seemed like there was always well, we're talking about oral tradition, so in that time frame, so remembering was vital to purpose and direction.
Yeah.
So we certainly would wish that for our kids. When we pray, we maybe praying those prayers, but we want them to remember God.
We do. Yeah, and what I'm kind of getting at, and you don't have to go here with me, I suppose, though I'll go here, because I've been really thinking about how much superstition has come into my faith and how much paganism is present in the way that I worship God. And I was having a conversation with somebody this week who was telling me that one place people are always willing to be ministered to is they're always willing to be prayed for. It seems like it doesn't matter what their religion is or whether they're antagonistic to the church or inclined to it, whether they believe in Wicca or they're atheists or agnostics or whether they're Muslim or Hindu or whatever they are. If you say, can I pray for you? Almost all the time people will say yes. And in that conversation, I was saying, yeah, because every religion on earth has a way of making an appeal to whatever they consider to be the force that directs the universe to ask for greater leniency in their case. Like everybody has a way to do that, one way or another. Sometimes it's through words, sometimes it's through action, sometimes it's through certain acts of obeisance. You can pray you can thank Mother Nature, you can pray to the universe. I remember this one person asked for the church to pray for them, and we did. And then I said, well, we prayed for you this weekend. And the person responded and said, thank you for sending positive thoughts into the universe for us. And I thought, that's not what we did.
Yeah.
Is that what you were asking for? So everybody kind of believes, you pray to your God. It's kind of like everybody on the boat with Jonah, right? They all cried out to their gods in their various ways. And they wanted to make sure Jonah was crying out to his God too. So if you say, can I pray in the Jesus name? Yeah, pray to your God, whoever he is. We'll throw all the spaghetti at the wall. Something might stick. That's kind of, so people are very willing to do that. And so prayer for pagans is a way of controlling the uncontrollable. It's the way of trying to get people to do what we want, especially divine people. And sometimes that translates into Christianity, where we kind of think prayer is a way to force God's hand. And I'm starting to see this with some folks, mostly from a much more charismatic tradition than ours, kind of the word of faith movement folks a little bit. And I don't want to throw them under the bus, but that's the group I'm reading about, who many of them prophesied that Donald Trump would get a second term. And they believe that if they prayed in faith, God would have to do it. You're getting some of that language, like God has to do what we ask if we ask in faith. And we've asked for this, so now we have to believe he's going to do it, because God would not go back on his word. You know, you're getting some of that. I don't know if you've read, there was a religious news service article on it just today that I was reading about the woman who Donald Trump has made his pastor. Her name, I can't remember her name. It's probably better that I don't remember it. Now I'm remembering it. I'm not going to say it. Okay. But I'm just telling you what's going on internally here, Minister Joe. So, but she did like a prayer meeting on Wednesday after the election, and then on Thursday saying very much these things. So prayer can be this way of controlling. And I've noticed that when I have opportunity to pray for people, I spend a disproportionate amount of time trying to convince God to do what I want him to do for them. Like I'm trying to control his decisions in their respect. I'm trying to influence them, I might say. I'm trying to incline God to my will, you know, just a little bit. And I noticed that the patriarchs and most of the people in the scriptures, I'm even noticing Paul in the scriptures when he prays for his churches at the end, they don't do it that way. They're always insistent on God's expressed will and figuring that forward, asking God to carry out what he's already said. And they're not quite so manipulative as I want to be in my prayers. You know what I mean? And I guess I'm noticing here that when Isaac is sending his son off on a long journey, and Isaac doesn't know if he'll ever see him again, right? Isaac is old. We've been told that many times. He's starting to fail. This might be the very last time he sees his son. And he spends no time begging God to do what he wants done for him. He simply reminds him of God's promises, sends them with him as blessings, and trusts him to God's hands. And I think, is that really the right way? Or is it just a right way? Or is it just a way that Isaac did it? I'm tempted, the way I see this played out in the scriptures, I'm thinking I'm doing something wrong.
You might think that, but there's, I think there's an air of confidence here too, that even though he's just making this statement, there's some reality there. I mean, he says,
yeah, he expects God to do what God says, right?
Yeah,
he does. There's no reason to try and convince God to do what he said he would do, because he knows he'll do it.
I mean, sending you over there, you're gonna be a foreigner. In a sense, he's going to a place where he should be accepted more than the Hittites, but and yet he's going to be a foreigner there. So there's a similarity between what Abraham experienced. Yeah. So it's interesting,
Yeah, I know I held us up on that. Yeah, I know I held us up on that, but I just notice how different it is. And I'm wondering, as I send my kids out, maybe it's more important that they remember God's promises than that they hear me begging God to do what I want him to do for them. Like, one of them shows that I'm willing to intercede for them on their behalf and ask God for things for them. Like, that's what it shows them. But I'm not sure that I see that oftentimes in the scriptures. Maybe occasionally. Certainly Jesus prays for the people, and we're meant to be the priests, and it's a value for my kids to see me come before the Lord on their behalf and ask for good things for them. I suppose there's a value in that, but that puts me front and center. And I don't have a lot good to say about Isaac. I haven't so far, so I want to say something good about him. He puts God front and center here. He puts God's promises, God's direction, and God's hand front and center. He's almost saying, whatever God wants to do with you, I release him to do to you. And I assume he's going to fulfill the promise he made to Abraham, because that's who he is. It's almost like Isaac is releasing Jacob rather than clutching at God. he's releasing Jacob to him. I'm taking that as a bit of a chastisement to me. You don't have to. That's how I'm reading it today. I think it's going to make me pray different, but anyway.
Yeah. Well, I think I'm at a different stage because my kids are a little older, and that the reality of them actually leaving is more.
But you're at the point, Jacob.
Probably
You're at the
yours.
point Isaac's at, right? You're at the point
my kids
Isaac
aren't
is
quite
at.
40 yet. But
Yeah, but he's a
they're
young
not
40.
quite 40 yet.
He's a young 40, Minister Joe.
Yeah, but the thing is more so now. I don't necessarily tell my kids what to do now or how to pray. I tend to more like ask them the questions to see what's the grit that they have. Instead of saying you're grit 80 if you're sandpaper, I say I'm more like asking what's needed here in this application.
What grit do you think I am, Minister Joe?
Maybe.
What grit would you rate me?
Well, I would say at least.
I'm a coarse grit, aren't I?
Yeah, at least a 40.
I'm not a 220, am I?
The edge right off.
Yeah. Come on, I think I'm at least a 60.
Maybe.
But that's what you asked them. What kind of a grit?
No, I'm using that as a physical example, but they more so, like I even ask my son sometimes, like, what do you think about this? When we went to look at the Honda car, I said, what do you think of this car? I said, we're fine. He said, oh, yeah. So in some ways, it's like I'm trying to give him the chance to be more than just somebody who's just going to accept information. He's going to be able to process things, and I think that's what Isaac really wants him to do. Wants Jacob to say, you wanted this blessing, you got this birthright. Now what are you going to do with it? Are you going to make something out of it? You're going to, because Rebecca's like, I can't take these women anymore. These Hittite women, they disgust me. I mean, I can imagine what the dinner table would have been like.
Yeah, I wouldn't want to be part of that family. Poor Esau too. Nobody talked to him about any of this. The poor guy goes out there and at least I don't think so, because he makes a change. As soon as he hears how upset his parents are, he makes a change, right? That's the next section we'll get into. So it's not like he's completely hardened to any of this.
Yeah, he's just clueless.
yeah, he's definitely clueless. Or they didn't even tell him who he should marry. I mean, he's 40 years old. Maybe they could have given him some guidance.
They could have told him, hey, go check out the land. There might be some good women over there. He was showing initiative.
But Isaac sends him away, and Jacob's going to take kind of a long journey. I'll share this so that so this is the journey. Isaac's here is in blue. I'll zoom in so you'll be able to see it better in a moment. But Isaac's journey is in blue. Eliezer's is in green when Abraham sends him. But all of the patriarchs are here. But anyway, Jacob begins, I guess they're saying he's more up near Shechem, but I disagree. I think he's in Beersheba, but he will end up near Shechem. This is when he gets to Bethel and whatnot. And he travels all the way up here back to Haran. And just to remind our folks that we're always talking about this same city that Abraham left, even though it gets a lot of different names, right? I mean, in the story of Isaac, when Jacob sends Eliezer, it has a different name than it does now. Nahor is what it's called, I think, in Isaac's case, and now it's called Padam Aram, but it's still Haran, just so people don't get confused. Sometimes the locations remain the same, but the city names get changed. But anyway, that's Jacob's journey. I think when Abraham took it, when the servant took it from down here, I think we said it was about 800 miles. So it's a little bit shorter from maybe where Jacob goes, but not by much. Mm-hmm. Not by much. So he's going to take this long journey back to Rebekah's household. And then we get to verse 6 here for our people. I won't put it on the screen. I don't think we'll have a lot to say about this. But Esau overhears this. Mm-hmm. He overhears that not only that Jacob is going, but he also either intuits or overhears why he's going. Mm-hmm. And Jacob does it, and Esau sees that the Canaanite women are not happy. It doesn't say, do you notice in verse 8?
Mm-hmm.
It doesn't say that he saw that they didn't please his mother. He says he saw they didn't please his father. So it's still front and center Esau and Isaac's special relationship. And I will say the good news of how the birthright was cheated out, or the blessing was cheated, it did not disrupt their relationship. Esau is still fiercely loyal to his father.
Mm-hmm.
So if Rebekah's intent was to rescue him, she did it.
Mm-hmm.
Now, we said that that's just one way of reading it. It's the way that I was pushing us to read it because it's my reading, but it doesn't have to be the only one. But we see that they're still friends. So Esau goes to Ishmael and takes a third wife from there as a way of appeasing his father. Now, I don't know if you want to, that's pretty much all we get from Esau. The rest of the story is going to be Jacob for a good long time. So do you want to say anything about that?
Well, I think we talked maybe a little bit about that before, about the idea of Esau taking an Ishmaelite. You know, I mean, and then later on talks about Ishmael and Isaac marrying Abraham together. So there's definitely something about this. It's like here's the Hittites, the Ishmaelites, maybe just a little up higher. In other sense, there's a type of relation, or connection, but it's not the same. It feels like Esau is trying to one up himself.
Yeah.
You know what I'm saying? To improve that, thinking that maybe that would be better status for him. I mean,
Yeah.
it's like he could have said, you know, hey, you know, I see Jacob's gonna go get a wife from you know, your side of the family, Dad, Rebecca's side of the family.
Yeah.
So, you know, I guess he could have said, you know, I want to go too. You know, if you weren't happy with who I married, why don't you just say so, or
and there's some family dynamics here too, because remember, Esau, if he wants to marry someone a little closer to his family, he has actually a number of options. I mean, he certainly could go to Haran himself if he wanted to. He does not choose to do that. That's a long journey, so that's understandable. But Abraham had other children too who lived in the area, not just Ishmael.
Yeah.
Do you think there's a reason he goes to Ishmael?
Well, I think we talked before about the appetites. We talked about his desire for the edge of or the wildlife, should we say? And that was his hunger for hunting, that sort of stuff. But also I think there's a connection with Ishmael and what God said about Ishmael and the contention that he would have everybody. And so in some ways, I think there's an attraction to that. I mean, even in our culture today, there are people who want to be dissonant, are constantly always taking a negative side, always critical of those around them. And so there's an appetite in some ways for this dissonance. And so I think this is a way of saying, in his ability to try to improve himself, he's going after the things that aren't really going to help him.
Yeah, maybe. I mean, you could be negative about it, but I agree with you. There's much that correlates between Esau and Ishmael. There's a possibility that, you know, Isaac loves the wild game. He loves that kind of. We've talked about the way he looks to be living a bit vicariously through Esau. That's also, those character traits are also Ishmael. So there might be a little envy of Ishmael that Esau picks up. Remember, he's doing this to please his dad. So I think there's a sense that he thinks a child of Ishmael would please his father. And I think that's interesting because Ishmael has some of the same qualities as Esau, as you're pointing out. And maybe Isaac envies those qualities. Maybe he, you know, sometimes younger siblings they look up to their older siblings. So it could be a little bit of that. The other thing you mentioned is that Ishmael also has a blessing from God. And it might be Esau thinking, you know, these other kids don't have blessings. maybe this would be a way to tether myself to a blessing. And then the other thing you pointed out, Ishmael also has a prophecy that he's going to be at odds with his brothers, and Esau has a very similar prophecy. So he may see their two blessings as compatible. There might be a lot of reasons biblically why that was a choice Esau would naturally make. And it might be negative. You're suggesting that he's going for all the wrong things. And I could see that.
Yeah,
I mean, they're not exactly maybe honorable reasons, but they certainly are very practical reasons. They make sense.
Yeah. Well, Isaac also has that Isaac is the one side of Abraham, well, is Abraham's blessing, but then you could say, like you just said about Ishmael having the other blessing. So logically thinking, I was thinking, well, this is my only other option.
Yeah. If I'm going to marry someone in Abraham's line, better be someone from Ishmael.
Yeah. So, but it's interesting that it says it's to please Isaac, in a sense that, because it seems like it's initiated here by Rebecca,
right,
for Jacob to go there to marry basically one of his cousins, I guess you could say. And so
you can see, can't you see the rift here between Rebecca and Esau?
Oh yeah.
He doesn't even consider going to her family. And the text doesn't say that he was upset that she was upset.
Right.
He's only upset that Isaac is.
Right.
Yeah. So there's a rift there. And we probably knew it. I mean, the text already told us that she preferred Jacob. And so there's a sense Esau might realize his mother doesn't much care for him. I wonder if he married the Hittite woman to bother her. Maybe the thing he didn't realize was it would bother his dad.
Right. Yeah.
I mean, we want to some of this is inference, obviously. We're not saying that's inspired, but these inferences are built off of details in the text that are worth noticing, and at least gives us a picture that this is a somewhat dysfunctional family. That's probably not that different than all of our dysfunctional families.
Right. Yeah. And if you hadn't sitting at the dinner table long enough with adult children, there are things that are going to be said that might be slightly irritating.
Yeah. And Esau wouldn't be the first one to marry to irritate one of his parents, only to sadly realize it also irritates the one he didn't want to irritate. Sometimes people do make life decisions punitively, like to punish people. It does happen.
Yeah.
I mean, it's not a good reason, and there's not a good end to that. But
yeah, usually unintended consequences that happen.
Yeah, but I've already noticed with my kids that if I speak too negatively about a friend, they're more apt to be with them than not.
Oh.
Like, you could just see that a little bit, like, I'm going to defend this person. Even if they're the ones who said, I don't like this person because they do this or that. And I'll say, yeah, that's not a good characteristic. Well, they don't mean to do it. Like all of a sudden they're defending them. I'm like, I shouldn't have agreed. I should have just let them process it. Probably the right thing would have happened. So we see a little bit maybe of that dynamic. I don't know what went down. We're not told. It's been edited out, the interactions of Rebecca and Esau. Can you recall in the story if there's ever a narrated interaction between Rebecca and Esau? I don't remember one myself. Yeah, so we don't really know the dynamics of that relationship, but we have enough information to know it probably wasn't very healthy. Right.
At that point, it's interesting that when they first saw each other, that it actually says that they loved each other. It's interesting.
Yeah, I didn't mean Isaac and Rebecca. I'm meaning Esau and Rebecca.
Oh, Esau. Right. Yeah.
If I said Isaac, that was a misspeak. I misspoke.
Yeah. I mean, as far as Esau and Rebecca, yeah, there's no conversation at all.
Yeah. Isaac and Rebecca, I'm actually inclined to believe that love continued, because I'm inclined to believe that she tried to rescue him with the whole deception thing. And now they seem to have a pretty reasonable conversation about Jacob. She's not completely honest with him about her reasoning for why she wants to send him away, but I'm sure what she says is honest. She just doesn't tell him everything.
Yeah.
But I'm guessing Isaac had to know that how Esau felt. Like you said, I said, how did Rebecca hear about Esau? And you said it must have been all the screaming.
Yeah. Yeah.
So I'm sure he's, Isaac knew. So yeah, I think Isaac and Rebecca, actually, I'm getting an increased feeling for their affection for each other as we go through this story again. But Rebecca and Esau is who I was talking about.
Yeah, I think Isaac and Rebecca probably thought that was only the real option. That's what they saw actually for theirs, modeled by Abraham and Sarah. So
yeah,
that to have that relationship or that the wife found from their family.
Yeah.
So because they were, and it emphasizes again that they were foreigners.
Yeah.
In that area, and that makes sense. But you think by then that, that it's a model, and we find that today, even in our own homes, that we tend to do things that were modeled by, whether they're good or bad, by our own families.
Yeah. Notice also how much more involved the family is at this time in the finding of a marriage partner. Today, that's seen as meddling kind of parents. Like, that's kind of a controlling thing. We sort of believe that you should find your own spouse, and if the parents get too involved, it's going to be looked at negatively. But that's not always the case. I remember this gentleman at a previous church was telling me a story of his daughter when she was a teenager, maybe late teens, early 20s, and had found someone she wanted to marry. And because the way he put it is, I met her and her husband, and he said, I'm responsible for that. And I said, what do you mean? And he said, well, when she was young, she wanted to marry somebody else, but I knew he wasn't right for her. And I said, really? So what did you do? I was very interested. I thought, he's going to give me advice here. And he said, I just sat her down and I explained to her why he was the wrong choice for her. And I said, well, what was her response to that? He said, she broke off the engagement. I said, she did? He's like, yeah. I said, do you know how rare that story is? Like, usually it's the opposite. And he said, well, and this is what he said to me. He said, we had a good relationship and she respected my opinion. I was like, I wish you could give me more on how you developed that.
Yeah. Well, but
she found this other man and married to him her whole life, and that's what he was saying, that he was glad because he knew that this was a better match than the first one. That's what he was saying to me. But I don't know how in the world he got that kind of respect out of his daughter.
Yeah. Well,
isn't that an unusual story? But it struck me as a biblical story because the patriarchs, and then even later, the parents had much more influence, it seems.
Well, it's always a risk, because to tell somebody that kind of advice. I mean,
what if she ended up marrying him? Now there'd be a rift, right? Because, we have plenty of stories of the opposite happening. A parent coming and saying, you're not right for him, and then they get married and there's a rift for the whole rest of the future.
Yeah. Yeah.
So you got plenty of those stories. I only have one of the other one to share, but I figured that's why I would share it.
Yeah.
Because it's the first time you've heard something like that, right? I mean, that's such a rare thing.
Yeah, he might have just got lucky.
You got lucky. That's what you should have said. Well, if you were there, you could have told him he was lucky.
You got lucky, man.
Yeah.
Lucky
maybe you're a coarser sandpaper than me.
It all depends what you're working on. If it's plastic, you don't need a lot of grit.
I go for a real low grit from the pulpit, but I'm usually quite a high grit when I'm actually with somebody. I got the Paul problem. Do you remember Paul? He said he's really bold when he writes, but he's really nothing to speak of in person.
Mm.
I'm like the opposite. I'm like, really bold from the pulpit and nothing to speak of in person.
Easy on yourself there, buddy.
Yeah, no, that's good. I like that. I'm going to use this against you for a long time. These grits.
Oh no, here we go.
We're going to have like a weekly grit update. I'm going to say, Minister Joe, what grit am I now?
Yeah.
I'm going to be working towards 120. I think 120 is a nice grit.
Yeah.
It can take some stuff off, but it doesn't scratch everything,
Yeah. My father-in-law, what he does, if he wants a little finer, he'll take the 120 and the 120, rub it together, and it gets finer that way.
You can buy 220.
Wear it out a little bit. Yeah.
See, now I'm like 40 again.
In a
jam. I made that comment.
You're 40 on the belt sander.
I know. You know, but if somebody wants to sand me, they're going to need a grinder.
Cut off wheel, right?
So let's move on to Jacob's little trip, because we got a little bit to talk about in this section, and then I think we'll be done for this week. We're not going to get into when he meets Rachel. Well, that's a little too much for us. Do you agree?
Probably, yeah.
Especially when people see where we're going next.
Yeah.
So I will read this because we got to get all these details in front of us. Jacob left Beersheva. See, I knew I was right. He was in Beersheva. What is the map telling us he was in Shechem for?
Liberal theology.
Yeah. Jacob left Beersheba and went toward Haran. He came to a certain place and stayed there for the night because the sun had set. Taking one of the stones of the place, he put it under his head and lay down in that place. I'm going to want to talk about this at some point.
Pillow.
Yeah. And he dreamed that there was a ladder set up on the earth, the top of it reaching to the heavens, and the angels of God were ascending and descending on it. And the Lord stood beside him and said, I am the Lord, the God of Abraham your father, and the God of Isaac. The land on which you lie, I will give to you and to your offspring. And your offspring shall be like the dust of the earth. And you shall spread abroad to the west and to the east and to the north and to the south, and all the families of the earth shall be blessed in you and in your offspring. Know that I'm with you and will keep you wherever you go and will bring you back to this land, for I will not leave you until I have done what I promised you. Then Jacob woke from his sleep and said, surely the Lord is in this place, and I did not know it. And he was afraid and said, how awesome is this place? This is none other than the house of God, and this is the gate of heaven. So Jacob rose early in the morning, and he took the stone that he had put under his head and set it up for a pillar and poured oil on the top of it. He called that place Bethel, but he gave the name of the city, but the name of the city was Luz at first. Then Jacob made a vow, saying, if God be with me and will keep me in this way that I go, and will give me bread to eat and clothing to wear, so that I come again to my father's house in peace, then the Lord shall be my God. And this stone, which I have set up for a pillar, shall be God's house. And of all that you give me, I will surely give 1/10 to you. There's a lot in there.
Oh, yeah.
So he sets out from Beersheba, which is roughly where Eliezer set out from. So we are talking about an 800-mile journey.
Mm-hmm.
He stops at Luz, which is going to be renamed Bethel.
Mm-hmm.
I'll just do this part so it's over with. But Beit is the second letter of the Hebrew alphabet, but it's also the word that means house or shelter.
Beit.
Some people say Beit, the letter itself looks like a hut. So Beit and then El is God.
Mm-hmm.
So house of God.
Yep.
So technically pronounced Beit El or Beit El, but we usually say Bethel. But there's no TH sound in Hebrew. That's there's an aspirated T. And so it's T that you breathe through. You try to do it. It's hard. But it's not, it's breathed through. So Bethel. But anyway, modern Hebrew is different. But in biblical Hebrew, that's what we're told. But anyway, we usually say Bethel because that's English. But it means house of God. It's quite literal. Quite literal. So anyway, that's a little bit of the Hebrew. So do people do this? Do they put a stone under their head to sleep? I've never done this. I've gone camping. I don't like camping, but I used to do a fair amount of it as a kid because my father took us out camping for caravan and other things. I never put a stone under my head. Did you ever do this?
Not a stone. I usually cleared them out from underneath me. It kind of hurts.
Let me tell you why I'm asking. Maybe that'll be clearer. Is this something we should be paying attention to as unusual for Jacob to do? Or do you think this is what campers do?
I think it's in conjunction of he's linking the physical dream. He doesn't know he's going to dream before he picks up the rock, but there's a couple thoughts, but I'm not sure.
Yeah, he's going to use this thing as a type of altar,
mm-hmm.
right? As a place marker. So it's significant that his head's laying on it when he dreams, and then he uses it as a marker and he anoints it, which normally you would anoint somebody's head. So there's a correlation between the stone and his head that's a little bizarre. So that's clear enough. I just wondered, I've never seen anybody put their head on a stone, but I've seen it happen in movies, and I figured you're a camper. Would you rather lay on a stone than your head on the ground?
For me personally, it would have to be the right type of stone. But I mean, there's the distance and all that sort of stuff. I'm thinking.
Oh yeah, it's not a boulder.
I mean, to put a pillar on it, you think to make a pillar, you think it'd have to be some maybe it was actually a wedge rock, a rock that like those pillows they have that are kind of inclined. For me personally, if I would prefer to sleep with my head a little elevated than to actually like.
So maybe it's just a normal thing.
Yeah.
Somebody will put in the comments, if there's anybody that's watched this far, they might tell me whether this is a camping technique. I tend to think that this is a sign that Jacob hasn't done much camping. That's why I'm pointing it out.
But yeah, I mean, it basically says that in the beginning, at the beginning, he just stayed around the tents at the house, and
I gotta have a pillow. And there's no pillow. I'm going to use this rock.
I forgot my pillow. Really, that happens all the time when people go camping. And if it's my wife, she has to have several pillows all the time, no matter where she is. But,
I just wondered. He typically stays around the house. He's more of a homebody. He's working in the family business, but he was taking care of sheep, so he probably did go out. But at this point, they have so many servants. Maybe he didn't even have to. Maybe he's more of a manager. And I just wondered if he grabbed his stone because he hadn't slept out very much. But maybe it's something normal people do. We won't belabor that any longer. It's going to be an important stone, though. That's the point.
Yeah.
So he sees this ladder. It's hard to interpret the Hebrew. The word could mean ladder, could mean stairs, maybe it could mean just an incline that goes up, but the point is clear enough. It's some sort of a bridge between heaven and earth, however you depict it. I would not depict it as a ladder going straight up. That's probably not what the word means.
Mm-hmm.
Probably more like a ramp or an incline or some kind of stairway. When I said to you, I said, I really want to talk about the stairway to heaven. And I threw you off because you were thinking of Led Zeppelin, I think.
Oh, yeah. Led Zeppelin.
So then I said Jacob's ladder, and you got what I meant.
Yes.
But anyway, it's some sort of a way, and the top of it reached to the heavens. So it's long. I'm not saying it reaches to the moon or something like that, but at least high enough that he expected it had access to the throne room of the gods.
Mm-hmm.
And there were angels. So this is not sons of God like we see in Genesis 6 or in Job. This is actually the word for angel, which means messenger. The word is, I'll look it up here because I can never remember. I always remember it's malach. Malach is the word for angel. And so that's what is climbing up and down. So they're messengers, and he doesn't know what they are. This is a task-oriented word. So it's interpreted for Jacob. He assumes couriers, God's postal system.
Mm-hmm.
That's what he sees. That somehow this is the place where they're coming up and down. And Jacob clearly believes that there's something sacred about the place. Like he thinks that this is an invisible reality at this place.
Mm-hmm.
So he names it the house of God. And he realizes that he didn't see how important this place was until he saw this vision. And it clearly says it was a dream.
Mm-hmm.
He sees it while he's asleep. So that's just some of the setup. How do you want to access this?
Well, we talked previously about how Isaac gives us kind of just like a statement, sort of. And so to me, I feel like this particular situation is what we desire for all of our kids eventually, is that they take the statements of faith and actually have to make them personal.
Yeah.
And so that's what we did on Sunday with the baptism. Yep. That's what we what we did in some ways in the children being dedicated on Sunday is like the precursor. So that's a total parallel here, where we want this for our kids. We want to train them that way, teach them in that way. Isaac sent out Jacob in this way. So now I think this is portraying all of the divine or God affirming Abraham's promise to him. He uses all the words, dust of the earth. He uses a lot of that imagery, and so there's nobody else there but Jacob. So this becomes extremely personal, and obviously when people have fantastic dreams or other places it's a theophany or God encounters them. It becomes extremely personal, and I think that's vital for the transformation of Jacob. This is like one of the first experiences we hear of Jacob having any kind of spiritual experience.
Yeah. So I want to get back to the latter thing, but I don't want to go off of what you're saying away from it. So I'm going to follow your track, but we'll have to backtrack to the ladder eventually, or the incline, whatever, the stairs. So I agree with you. I think we find out here that God affirms Isaac's blessing, right? Because Jacob is now receiving the promise of Abraham personally from God. And so God encounters him and gives him this promise. And that's what you're emphasizing. I don't have a lot more to say. I think you covered it. This is exactly what we want for our children. We want them to personally encounter God. We want the promises that God made to our ancestors to come through to them so that they will walk with God in relationship with him. This is an ideal circumstance in those ways. Mm-hmm. I agree with you entirely. In fact, something weird happened on Sunday to me when we were doing those dedications. Normally when I do a dedication, and you've seen me at least do one, I don't know if you remember the ones I did at New Beginnings or not, or if you were ever participated in them. But I always use oil, and I always anoint the forehead, and I have a very simple kind of anointing that reaffirms the things that we're saying. But for some reason on Sunday, I felt that I need to bless each of these children. And I've not done that before. That would be a very first. Jen asked me what came over me. And I said, I don't know. I felt like I needed to bless them. Mm-hmm. And it was very much like Isaac's blessing, where I was just kind of speaking the word, the promises of God to them. And I had to ask Jen afterwards. I said, did I bless both children? Because I couldn't remember. I couldn't remember if I had said the same name twice or if I did them both. She said, no, you got them both and they were both different. I said, yeah, I thought so. It's a really weird experience, but it's very similar to this. Yeah. But it anticipates a day where they themselves will encounter the God that we're talking about. So I agree with you. I said I had nothing else to say. That's almost always a lie from me inadvertently. It's only a lie if you believe it. Yeah. If you don't believe it. And I meant it, but I was wrong. So but this next part, do you see something has happened between Abraham and Jacob, which is Isaac, where trust in this God wasn't passed down? Do you see it? Jacob wants God to prove himself to him. That might be the greatest evidence that Isaac had a very different relationship with God than Abraham had, that somehow it didn't translate. Because Jacob is going to be way more like Abraham was. But Jacob is kind of starting, maybe not as far back as Abraham did, where he didn't know who this God was at all. But Jacob is requiring this God to prove himself. Do you see the negotiation in his prayer? I'll serve you all my life if. Did you see the if in there? If God will be with me and will keep me in the way that I go and will give me bread to eat and clothing to wear so that I come again to my father's house in peace, then the Lord shall be my God. So Jacob, now you could think of this as Jacob being a faithless person or testing the Lord, but I don't think so. Somehow what Abraham had learned about God did not transfer to Jacob through Isaac.
Well, I think he's also with the realization that his brother's going to kill him. There may be some something here that, hey, if this is for real, and you really want me to carry on this blessing,
Yeah.
you're gonna have to be serious about this.
Yeah, but you can't pass on a personal walk with God.
Yeah.
Now,
Well,
I think Isaac could have tried harder. I think Isaac had a very different relationship with God than Abraham did. I think I see it through the story, and I can tell that his kids don't quite know God the way Abraham knew God. And maybe even Isaac didn't get that from Abraham. But one thing is true, you can't pass down faith in God to your children. They have to learn that faith themselves. And Jacob is here saying, you're going to have to prove yourself to me. And that is a theme that runs through the scriptures. Gideon comes immediately to mind when the angel comes to him and calls him a mighty warrior and says, the Lord is with you. And Gideon says, he's with us. What would it be like for him to be against us?
yeah, right.
The Midianites are eating all of our crops. I'm threshing wheat in a wine press. I'm in a hole in the ground threshing wheat. If you know anything about horticulture, that's not the wisest thing to do. God's with us, and so Gideon has to put out fleeces. He says, well, prove to me that God is going to be with me, because it doesn't look like he's with me. You get that same thing with Jacob here.
Yeah.
God's going to have to prove himself. Now, you might think God will say, who do you think you are?
Mm-hmm.
But he doesn't do that. He accepts this. Mm-hmm. And I think even God knows. You can't just expect people to trust you because you say so. Mm-hmm. Like Jacob, it's the same thing with Moses. Like Moses says, how do I know? How do I know that you're really going to do this? And remember we talked about this in Exodus, and God says, you'll know when you come back to this mountain and my people are delivered. No, right. Right. I think I need some assurances before that.
Yeah.
You want me to do this?
Convince these people too. Ooh.
Yeah. But it's still God that's his name. I am, right? I will be. It's sort of like, you're going to have to learn me as you walk with me. And Jacob says, I'm going to follow you if you prove yourself trustworthy to me. Mm-hmm. Now, God could have said, right back at you, buddy.
Right. Yeah.
He doesn't, but he accepts this from Jacob. And so it's just interesting to me. Jacob, even though he's raised in Abraham's family, it's clear to me in this prayer that he still doesn't know if he can trust God or not. Like but he's willing to give it a shot.
It's that personal side too. And it's like, I'm sure Isaac told them both, Esau and Jacob, the story of being on the altar. So Jacob, well, we know they both responded differently. I mean, Jacob seems to want, there's something, a relationship with God, and Esau doesn't accept it at all, it seems. Yeah. It doesn't seem like he fears God. It doesn't talk about him fearing God.
No.
And yet, again, the focus is carrying on the faith and promises of Abraham.
Yeah.
So but when we read that part, it says, and will give me bread and clothing to wear. Immediately I thought of men in the desert. I thought about how their clothes didn't wear out.
Yeah.
Some interesting things.
Because those are the tribes of Israel. Yeah. So Jacob's prayer is actually fulfilled even in his children and his children's children. Yeah, you're right. Absolutely. This points right to the wandering in the wilderness. So God remains faithful to this request of Jacob to 1,000 generations. Isn't that what he said he would do?
There's some good numbers there. But he also told Abraham about them being in slavery for 400 years. So
yeah, for 10 generations they'd be enslaved.
Where did he get this? Let me throw a question at you. Where did he get this idea of the pillar?
Yeah, it's got to be in the culture, right? Abraham does this too. Remember when he comes into the land, he puts at significant points, he builds these altars. Yeah, that's essentially what Jacob is doing. But Jacob is marking his own territory. Now, you don't see Isaac do that. Isaac got a well. I guess in Isaac, the pillars were wells, but you don't see him anointing them and then giving them to God. But Jacob puts down his first flag, if you want to call it that, his first marker in this new land. Mm-hmm. And he does it at Bethel. That's not where Abraham had. Abraham had put him at Shechem near Shechem, and maybe at Bethel. Maybe I'm wrong about that. Maybe he did, but I thought it was Hebron was the other place that Abraham did it. We'd have to look back. I'm sure somebody can do that.
Mamre.
Yeah, the Oaks of Mamre, which are near Shechem.
Yeah.
And I think it was at Hebron was the other one.
Could be, yeah.
But Jacob puts his down here at Bethel. So it is a family trait to mark these significant places with a stone. And I think that's what he's doing. But he doesn't make a sacrifice, which is probably why it's not called an altar. But he doesn't have anything to sacrifice. Jacob is not the hunter.
Yeah.
And he's gone off on his own.
And then he talks about a tithe.
That's an interesting detail. Yeah, because this is the second time tithing has come up in Genesis.
Yeah.
So the first time, since you're asking the question, the first time was with Melchizedek, when Abraham gave him 10% of the booty from the war.
Right.
And you might read it that he gave him 10% of everything he had. It's a little difficult to tell in the Hebrew what's at stake. I think most assume it's just from the booty from the battle, but you might even say he gave him 10% of everything. Mm-hmm. And Jacob insists that if God does these things for him, whatever the produce is, whatever he gets, he'll give a tenth back to God.
Yeah.
Why? Yeah, this is the question. Where are they getting the tithing idea? Mm-hmm. It must be cultural, but it's going to be ensconced in the law of Moses eventually, where the Israelites have to set aside a tenth. And that has to be related to this.
Sure, it's not the metric system.
We were talking about the metric system before we recorded. I'm sure it's not the metric system.
It's the metric, the matrix that he wanted them to use.
Yeah, I wonder though but for anybody who thinks of tithing as tied to the law of Moses, reading Genesis, we have to realize that it was long before that. It's an instinct in Abraham and in Jacob, and then it gets ensconced, and it's mentioned in the New Testament where Jesus says that the Pharisees tithe their mint, dill, and cumin, but they fail to attend to the deeper parts of the law. Mm-hmm. He said you should have done the former without neglecting the latter. Mm-hmm. So even Jesus affirms that tithing is part of God's expectation, right? At least for Israel.
Yep.
So it's very interesting practice. And it's right here in Jacob. And I don't know where he got the idea. All I could say is he must have got it from Isaac, who got it from Abraham. That's the only way we can trace it. But where did Abraham get it from? And you'd think he got it from Sumeria, because God never tells him to do it.
Right.
I'm wondering if this is a Sumerian practice, because Abraham came from Ur. And giving the gods a portion of your produce is part of almost every pagan religion in the Middle East. But it's interesting how it carries on into the law of Moses and then even into the New Testament. And even though the New Testament authors do not require a 10% giving, like you don't see that in Paul and 2 Corinthians, for instance, when he talks about giving, they do want first fruits given to God, and they do want a certain amount set aside that people are faithful in giving. So they don't get down to the legalistic amount, but the idea of living on less than you make and giving God a portion of the produce, whatever that means, is part of the Bible all the way back. Even Abel and Cain give the first fruits of their crop. You might say the tithing begins there.
Yeah, it's probably exampled in the situation with Melchizedek, but the idea that it's that if-then kind of statement.
Yeah.
That is real there. I mean, if God will be with me, and then I will give. I will surely give 1/10. It sounds like it's modeled in that relationship because that can Abraham.
Yeah, it feels like an exchange of sorts, right?
Yeah, but how does that work? So
some people try and draw this principle out into tithing and say that you only tithe on the increase. Because that's what Jacob is promising. Like basically whatever you give me, I'll give you a 10th back. Mm-hmm. And so there are some people who draw out that principle. But I think we should be careful about drawing legalistic principles out of this. I think what's important is the instinct of Jacob to realize that he's going to owe God from the blessing, that if God's going to be the one to provide this, then it's only right that God gets some of it back.
Right.
And Jacob has that instinct. I don't know if we want to get legalistically tied up on the amount, but in the law of Moses, you had to be legalistically tied up on the amount. But even tithing in the law of Moses is different than it's presented today, because most of the time the tithe was eaten by the family at the end of the year. So you can do your own research in the law of Moses on that. But the tithe was, as I read it now, I think we've talked about this before. I think we did with Melchizedek, so I don't want to get too far into it. But I won't get into all the other theories that are out there. But for me, the tithe is on a 7-year cycle, 2 3-year cycles, and then a year off. So for 2 of the 3 years, the tithe is reserved and then brought to Jerusalem at the end of the year for a final feast, and the family eats the whole tithe in one party. And so it's not given to the priest, but the 3rd year, it is for the priests and for the poor. And so I imagine that the whole country is on a different schedule so that the priests and the poor are always being cared for. But an individual's tithe was once every 3 years for the priests and the poor, and the other 2 years, they themselves ate it at the end. So that's tithing. It went on a 2 3-year cycle. And then the 7th year, there was no tithing because there was no farming. And the tithe was for the produce. And so they just ate whatever the field produced. They weren't allowed to till it or seed it or do anything in that 7th year. That was the Sabbath year. And so there's no tithe in the 7th year for anybody. So that's a little different. Like today, people think of tithing as primarily a gift given to the church. And I think that's technically what the Nazarene Manual says. You know, far be it from me to disagree, but that's not what the tithe was in the Old Testament. And I don't think it is in the New either. Maybe that's just a convenient way to pay bills. But I do think the idea, that was my 40 grit coming out, Minister Joe.
Oh, I felt it.
But the idea that if God is going to provide, that we owe him a tribute for that is as old as Cain and Abel.
Yeah.
And I think faithful people have always recognized that that's right to do. And you've got to release it somehow. It can't be yours to use as you see fit. And so churches are nice places for that if you trust the ministry they're doing. But I think the point is that whatever you consider God's ministry in the world to be, a portion of that income should be given back to him. I think that's the basic principle, as long as we don't get caught up on numbers. I usually treat 10% as the lowest I would give, because I figure if the law of Moses requires it, it's got to be the foundation. It's got to be the baseline. But then obviously we would be willing to give more if the Lord asked it or if needs arose.
Yep.
And I typically do give it to the church, but I'm not sure legalistically that's required. But I typically feel if I'm investing in a ministry and being invested in by it, that's where I would want to give. But of course, that's my decision. I hate to be legalistic about it. Am I going to lose my credentials after this, Minister Joe?
Probably not. There's probably bigger deals. Bigger fish to fry. You know, sand grit can be a little stronger on that too. Yeah,
Do you see how I switched from 40 grit to 220 like lightning speed?
Lightning.
I got a variety pack, Minister Joe.
Got the hook and loop and peel it right off.
Yeah.
Stick it right back on. Well, the thing, I think it's important too to remember that the if-then statement like that shows that if he is going to give 10% to God, that there is actually a reaction or something that shows as a result that a witness of that God's actually done this for him.
Right.
And so if he's willing to give a tenth, whether it be money is one thing, but
for him, it's not going to be money, right?
Yeah,
for him, it's going to be flux.
Yeah, everything really. A tenth of his time, all that stuff is real, but it shows that he's responding.
Yeah.
That it's not just an internal thing. That's for some very external things from God, like you're gonna return me back to my homeland. You're going to what is it here again? Clothing, bread to eat. You know,
he's not asking for a lot.
No,
right?
I mean, there's not a lot of land there, or there's not, you know, he's not even asking there right there for a woman or a wife.
Yeah, here's a bizarre
Or
part of
kids.
this story. Here's a bizarre part of this story that you're pointing out. Maybe you're inadvertently pointing it out, or maybe you're doing it on purpose. But when Abraham sent Eliezer on this trip, he sent him with a mass caravan, right? Camels,
Oh
wealth,
yeah,
people. Is it just me, or does Jacob seem to be alone?
he's very alone. And
So,
that was the very fear that Abraham had.
yeah. Why did Isaac send him alone? Do you think this is a little
Well,
for
because
deceiving him?
because his brother was going to kill him.
You think just he got out fast? Is that what you're thinking?
Oh yeah, yeah. And he forgot his pillow.
He did forget his pillow. He needed that rock. But it's strange, isn't it, that Isaac would send the future with no real protection? And maybe we can say it's been edited out and he's actually not alone. But when he gets to Laban, he doesn't come the way Eliezer did by giving all these jewels and money. And he pretty much comes with a shirt on his back and has to work for everything.
Mm-hmm.
It's interesting, since this is the guy who's going to get the birthright. He's going to get the blessing, but he doesn't even know if he's going to have food or clothing when he arrives. There's something going on here, Minister Joe.
Well, again,
something smells fishy.
It's that personal faith, personal development.
I still wonder if Isaac was punishing him in a way, saying, if God really wants you to have all this stuff, he'll take care of you.
Well, it's not only that. Abraham said, I can't send Isaac because he won't come back.
Yeah.
So send Jacob. He ain't coming back.
Yeah, maybe he didn't want him to come back. There's a lot here, isn't there?
Oh yeah.
This is not a healthy family. I'm becoming more and more convinced this is not a healthy family.
Well, it's stressful. It feels stressful. The kids want to kill each other.
I know. So Jacob makes this promise, and God does actually fulfill it. And this feels a little like Ishmael to me, where Jacob has been sent out with almost nothing, and God comes and visits him and gives him a promise. So there's a lot going on here. I'm struggling to like Isaac.
Yeah. If you want to model your fatherhood after that.
I was always so hard on Jacob, and now I'm really regretting that.
Yeah. Well, he's an easy target. He really is,
Yeah.
The name.
I owe him a few apologies, but now I'm getting afraid to meet Isaac one day. So I'm sure they could care less what any of us have to say. So I'm sure it'll be fine.
Yeah, just change your sandpaper grit. You'll be okay.
Yeah, I wonder what grit you can use with Isaac. He seems pretty sensitive. I'm gonna need some 400 grit stuff. I don't even think they sell that at Home Depot.
Yeah, you might have to really wear it out. 400.
So before we finish, because that's the end of the story, I want to go back to this ladder and these angels. We've been talking about the supernatural worldview of the First Testament, and certainly the book of Genesis. We already dealt a little bit of what was going on at Babel, and before that at the flood, with the sons of God marrying daughters of men, and producing children by them. We talked about all the options. At that time, I think that these really are spiritual beings that are being discussed, but I don't think they're having physical children. I think they're spiritual beings. I don't think they can get all the equipment working for procreation. But I think they're impregnating the woman with their ideas. And that's what we see kind of in the Jewish mythological tradition that we see ensconced like in First Enoch and Second Enoch. Primarily, that story does talk about copulation. It talks about actual children. But the primary thing that these beings do in those stories is they give knowledge.
Mm-hmm.
They teach them things they weren't supposed to know. And that goes back right to the Garden of Eden, right? Where they take knowledge they're not supposed to. And that's what Satan wants them to do. So I think they're impregnating these people with knowledge that's been taken. They're continuing the work of the serpent, the Nachash, in the encouraging the people to eat from the tree of knowledge. And they're impregnating them with these ideas, which give birth to these super warriors who are infused with knowledge. You might even say we are the Nephilim. We would impress even the Nephilim, like because of our technology and the way that our knowledge has created destructive weapons that could literally destroy the planet. I think that's kind of what's going on, but I do think it's a spiritual infection. I think these spiritual beings are participating in the impregnating of people with this knowledge. I think that's what's going on there. That's just my read. People can go back and listen. You had another read, and we talked about a couple other options. I know Michael Heiser believes that they actually were able to physically copulate with women and produce hybrid children that were partially spiritual and partially human. I don't believe that, but he definitely believes that the Jewish people believe that. All right, whatever. But I do think it's spiritual.
Yeah.
I agree with Heiser, what he says about Babel, based on Deuteronomy 32 and Psalm 82 and some other things, that God puts the other nations under the jurisdiction of lesser members of his divine council, and he then works with Israel. So we talked about that supernatural worldview. You can see it in Job, where the sons of God come before him to give an account of the earth, and the Nachash, in that case, the Satan comes with them. And here we have it here too. There's obviously a bridge between heaven and earth here, and the messengers of God are ascending and descending. So he has these spiritual beings that are coming back and forth on the earth. That's consistent with what we saw in Genesis 6. It's consistent with what's happening at Babel. It's consistent with Job. And so here it is again. So I don't know if you want to say anything about that reality. I know many modern Christians would prefer to see all of this as myth. And it's a dream after all. It's not real. Now, I would want to point out, Jacob sees it as real. He sees that dream as revealing to him a spiritual reality, and he names the place based on it. So at the very least, you want to say Jacob believes that what he saw was real, even though he saw it in a dream. And I would say that the First Testament assumes this type of reality is part of reality. I think you can see it in the visions of Isaiah and Ezekiel when they're caught up into the throne room of God. I think even in the New Testament, you'll see some have entertained angels unawares, as Paul says. He clearly believes our battle is against spiritual forces of evil in the heavenly realms. That's clearly articulated in a couple of books. And then Revelation, of course, is very similar to the apocalyptic literature of the First Testament. So I think this idea that Michael Heiser has suggested, and many Old Testament scholars have, that they have a worldview that believes in these things, I think that's true. The next question is, so do we have to believe in it? My instinct is to say, yes, we do. I don't know what yours is, but here we have another example of the fact that there is a spiritual reality that's going on behind the scenes that most of us are unaware of.
Yeah, I would definitely agree that there is that spiritual reality. But at the same token, I think there's it's intertwined. It's not necessarily something that's like extra, like dimensional. Star Trek or other people may be toying with that idea. Again, I think it's vitally linked to the affirmation that Jacob needs in the face of all the turmoil, basically getting sent away to find a wife.
Right.
There's a lot of things there that obviously Isaac was not preparing him for, or at least it doesn't talk about it. You get this picture he's alone.
Right.
The actual physical shape and what it looks like, I think, is more complex and probably harder to imagine or draw. Although many of artists and people have tried to explain it, it's probably not a word ladder
Well, you're kind of pushing
extension
us
ladder.
you're pushing us in a direction that I think is important, and it's the question: why did God want Jacob to have this vision? And
I
you're
think
saying it's an
that's the real.
encouragement to him.
I think it's a part of the message, the physical uh, uh, message was brought to him. I believe in that methodology. It had to be something bigger than his circumstance. Bigger, the fascination with it, or the excitement or ecstasy, some people would call it, of or awe of God, had to be something greater than he probably had never seen anything like that.
Yeah.
And so,
well, let's be fair. Abraham never
so in
saw
some
anything
ways,
like that.
so in some ways, it's basically God fulfilling in a dream what Babel was 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 trying to do as humans.
Yeah.
You know what I'm saying? That they're trying that connection with God that I think is it's instead of man trying to reach up to God, it's actually God reaching down to Jacob to say, hey, this you're in layman's terms or just easy conversational terms, hey, this is real. You're vital to continuing this call that I've given to Abraham. These are my messengers that are actually bringing you this affirmation, and up and down those ladders or the staircase or however you want to call it, reveals that there's more supernatural going on.
Yeah.
And I envision them actually bringing the message to him.
Yeah, it's possible. So what I want to dovetail with what you're saying, because I think it's right on. This is very much like Babel. And we talked about this, Lucas and I did this discussion because you were away, but ziggurats were built by the ancient Sumerians as places for the gods to dwell. So they wanted the gods to come down and dwell on the top of that. And then that would be a way of inviting the god into your city. So the reason they wanted that tower, most likely at Babel in the culture of the time, is because it would be a way to bring the gods to their city, some way of validating the importance of this city as a capital city, that you got to have a god dwelling there. So that's why they did it. And of course, God did come down, but then he scrambled their languages and ruined their project, and then disowned the nations and gave them to lesser spiritual beings. And then he chose Abraham. So it's a different story. But one thing this would definitely communicate to Jacob is that this land already has a ziggurat. This is where God has chosen to come up and down, because at the top of this incline in the world of the ancient Near East would be the throne room of God. So what he's telling him is, this is where God is. And so that's why he calls it Bethel, the house of God. So it's a way of letting Jacob see how special this land is. And if there was any wonder if he would go to Laban and stay, once he's had this vision, he won't, because he'll want to come back to where God is. So I think that's essentially important as to why God gives him this vision. He's trying to, I think, help Jacob understand the importance of this land, that God has somehow chosen it.
Yeah, because basically, although it's in the land, and although it may be a place near where Abraham maybe had a portion of land or whatever, it still pointed out that it's on the way. It's like comes out of nowhere. It's just like a little bit out of nowhere. Just pulled up a rock, stayed for the night. It's the Motel Rock 6,
It's not even a city.
Yeah.
I mean, it just shows you that this God makes these choices. The people aren't going to make the choice. And that dovetails with God's election of Jacob. It was before he was born that God chose him. And Bethel he chose before there was a city. It's very different than the way the pagans thought. They thought they would choose the location, build the city, and then God would come. But what God reveals is he's already set up his throne room in this location. There's nothing there.
Right.
So God takes the initiative. There's a lot bound up in that.
Yeah.
So here's my next question. It's for both of us. What is Jesus talking about when he refers to this story? This is in John. The context is when Nathanael, I'll just read it. Next day, Jesus decided to go to Galilee. This is really early on. This is chapter 1 of John. He found Philip and said to him, "Follow me." Now, Philip was from Bethsaida, the city of Andrew and Peter. Philip found Nathanael and said to him, "We found him about whom Moses in the law and also the prophets wrote, Jesus, son of Joseph from Nazareth." Nathanael said to him, "Can anything good come out of Nazareth?" That's the origin of our name, by the way. Church of the Nazarene. Philip said to him, "Come and see." When Jesus saw Nathanael coming toward him, he said of him, "Here is truly an Israelite, in whom there is no deceit." Nathanael replied, "Rabbi, you are the Son of God. You are the King of Israel." What a turn. Jesus answered, "Do you believe because I told you that I saw you under the fig tree? You'll see greater things than these." And he said to him, "Very truly I tell you, you will see heaven opened and the angels of God ascending and descending upon the Son of Man." So this is a reference to Jacob's vision.
Yeah, it sure is.
What is Jesus meaning to say?
Well, yeah, there's definitely that affirmation of seeing him underneath the tree, or seeing, if you want to parallel it with Jacob, the fig tree could be same idea as the rock he put his head on, and the fact that Jesus is saying that this truth came to you from the Father, from God, that and that's he probably could have said it in more simpler terms. Essentially, that's what he means.
I think it's what he means. And I think the image, though, is important because remember what ziggurats were. They were the means by which the gods could come down. They were like a physical bridge to a spiritual reality. And that's what Jacob sees. I mean, it's not called a ziggurat because it's nothing like the pagan nations were trying to build. Instead, it's an incline, right? But it's the incline that bridges heaven and earth. And Jesus is saying, more or less, I am that bridge.
Mm-hmm.
I'm the temple on which God can descend. I'm the incline that the angels can come up and down. I am the bridge between heaven and earth. So you're going to see way greater things than the fact that I knew what you said when I wasn't there to hear it.
Yeah.
Like that's the tip of the iceberg, man. I'm the bridge between heaven and earth. That's a huge statement. And it ties back to the fact that what the people were trying to manufacture at Babel had become flesh in Jesus. I think that's the tie back. So Jesus is the temple of the Holy Spirit. He is the ziggurat. He is in the flesh, the bridge.
Definitely conveyed there, and the fact again, it's the emphasis of here Nathaniel's underneath that tree, that fig tree, and I get the image that this he's thinking this is supplying his needs.
Right.
I like figs. I actually had a few for my dessert after lunch.
I like dates better than figs, but I get it.
I like dates better too. And it's the seeds in the figs that are a little too weird for me, but I like them. Their skin's a little tough too. A little different.
They are.
Ones that I get them from Costco, so it wasn't. But probably because they're a little dried. But he's being resourced. Nathaniel's being resourced, just and the source of comfort, this kind of idea, and yet Jesus saying that he knows you that well, knows who he is. To make that claim, there's no deceit in this man. When he just said what good could come out of Nazareth. Right. I mean, there's the truth of questioning, really knowing what you believe, and I think that was a challenge to Jacob, as a
Yeah.
challenge to us today, challenge to Daniel, is that what Jesus said himself in that temptation, that our food is really the word of God.
Yeah.
It comes to us physically. That's Jesus himself. But it's the affirmation, or that knowledge of knowing information, or knowing the truth and actually living into it.
Yeah.
Is that connection, that idea of the ladder, because you can't walk up an incline or go go up a ladder without some intention and actual direction.
Yeah.
So I think that's what Jesus is saying strongly there too as well, is that there's got to be some action to what you believe.
And this puts a visual picture on his claim that he is the only way to the Father.
Yeah.
Right? How do you get from heaven to earth? Well, Jesus. He's the only bridge. You can't build a ziggurat and find your way there. You can't build a tower that reaches into the heavens. You can't follow a road written out in law to find your way into the heavens. Jesus is the only way, and that's again what he's saying, because what's important is not that the angels are going up and down. What's important is that it is a bridge between heaven and earth.
Right.
And so he is the narrow way, right? But he's also the reason that there's any connection. Like, he is the one God chose.
Mm-hmm.
So it's quite a bold thing. You might call this the first of the I am statements in John, even though he doesn't say I am.
Mm-hmm.
But just like he says, I am the bread, I am the water, I am the resurrection and the life, here I am the bridge. You know, I am the ladder, I am the ziggurat, I am the temple of the Holy Spirit. Like, that's more or less what he's saying here. And these guys are Jewish people. They're going to know what he's referring to. Now, they may not understand all of that it means.
Yeah, he's also saying that I am the promise. I am the promise, because that's what was promised.
That's what was promised. Yeah.
In Jacob.
Yep. Yeah. So it's a remarkable story here. Jacob gets quite an experience on his way, and it's been my experience, Minister Joe. I don't know about yours. The more dramatic God's communication, the harder the road ahead is.
Yeah, we physically need to have things to to help you, not to focus on, but to have that affirmation. I mean, when the heaven was open and God said, and the Holy Spirit came out when Jesus came up out of that water, I don't know anybody could not be like, yeah, I believe, I get it. You know what I'm saying? But there's still people there.
Well, biblically, nobody saw it, except Jesus. And if it wasn't for the Gospel of John, we wouldn't even have known John the Baptist saw it, because it's not narrated in the other Gospels. But John does confess that he saw it. But yeah, they're the only two that saw it. You're right, though. If everybody had seen it, you'd think, what in the world's wrong with these people? But that was private.
But again, it's that affirmation. I think
Jesus needed that. Yeah, and of course, Jesus is God. You ask yourself, why did he need it? Well, again, the more dramatic God's communication, the more devastatingly difficult the road ahead is. Like, you don't wish to be Isaiah caught up into the throne room of God, or Ezekiel, because the road ahead was horrific.
Mm-hmm.
The more dynamic God communicates, like Paul, the more difficult the road. And I think for the reasons you're saying, the road ahead is likely one we would turn away from if we didn't have these stones from the River Jordan to remember. And Jacob trusts God because of this vision, but he's going to need to trust God.
Yeah. That's it. And then he anointed it. I mean, the house of God sounds like strong words. I mean, because it's pretty much the doorstep.
He's kind of saying this is Babel. If he were speaking as somebody from Ur of the Chaldeans, he would have said, "This is Babel. This is where we should have built the city.
This is the real one.
This is the real place." And it's always interesting to me that this is not where they end up establishing Jerusalem, because that would have been the most logical place. But there's a reason they choose Moriah and not Bethel, because Moriah is a place of mercy. And when David chooses a city, he wants to choose a place where God showed mercy. That's a very interesting theological decision, because it's Moriah at the threshing floor of, oh boy, I can't remember the guy's name. But anyway, where God, the plague, where God is striking down the people because of David's sin and counting them, that's where the plague ends. That's where he wants the temple. It's also the traditional place where Abraham was going to sacrifice Isaac. So he chooses, when David chooses a place for God's temple, he chooses a place of mercy, not Bethel, which is the more natural choice. If you were a pagan, that's where you would put it. You'd want to put God's temple at the place where God, the bridge exists. But that's not what David does. He does it where God showed mercy. There's something theological in that. You might even say David wants to remind God of his mercy in his very location. So everything's theological. But I've always thought Bethel would have been the natural place. Jacob calls it the house of God. It has the bridge there already. Why not build your temple there? That's where the pagans would build it.
Yeah. I just got this image in my mind. Kids were watching Stargate.
Yeah.
That's the image that came to my mind when we're thinking of the ladder.
Yeah, Stargate. This is where the Stargate is. Yeah, this is where you can get from heaven to earth. So you might say, well, they just thought of that as metaphor, but we might think of it as metaphor. I don't think they did. Jacob names this place the house of God, and he believes it's a special place. And David will later call the temple the house of God. So why not build the house of God at the house of God? Well, David wants the capital city of well, first he wants the temple in his capital city, which is probably a big motivation. And he didn't have his capital city at Bethel. Bethel's a very exposed area. It's not very defensible. So there might be reasons. Right. But if you ask me, where did God want the temple built? I think here. But where does David build it? Well, he builds it in his capital city, and he builds it at a place of mercy. Just interesting. But when Jesus insists he, as the temple of the Holy Spirit, is at Bethel. It's just interesting. It's just interesting. So who knows if they made the right decision then? But the people of Israel were never making God's decisions the way God wanted them to. So, but God anoints that temple. Solomon asks God, if the people called by your name pray in this place, will you hear them? That's the passage everybody likes to quote. And God says, yeah, I'll listen to you in this temple. But you know what Solomon never asks and what David never asks? Where do you want us to build it? They never ask that.
Yeah, and sometimes people don't ask questions because they just don't want to know.
Yeah.
Right?
Yeah. So anyway, do you have any closing words, final thoughts?
Well, yeah, I mean, I'll always, I think we hit on it before. We got to be careful about always looking for the sensational things. I'm more prone these days to look for the most simple things and the simple reactions. Like if I feel like God is saying to me do something, and I'll ask him. I'll physically ask him, is this really you? Is this what you want? Because if I linger too long, I know that time will pass.
Yeah.
And I would say, I have had some personal experiences where, particularly with dreams that I cling on to at times, but I also know that I don't particularly believe that we should encourage people to seek those kinds of things all the time.
Yeah.
Because I think it's almost the sensational side that people can look for. It's sort of like all these books out that talk about heaven's for real, or these other experiences that people have had that I think force us to focus more on the rock that Jacob put his head on than the God who's
Yeah.
And so people are looking for rocks everywhere as opposed, or pillars,
Yeah.
rather than God himself. So I would say there's that what we find here in this passage is there's an intimacy with Jacob and God that's not portrayed earlier on in the passage. So I see a growth and development, moving more towards faith like Abraham had, and I think you said that earlier. So I would encourage us to not necessarily cling to those sensational things, but to try to hear the small voices, as other people have said, and allow God to work in us and through us, and to give it to realize that a sustainable relationship is something that takes personal daily investment.
Yeah.
And I think that's that idea of that 10%, that reaction to what God has done, is a reflection that there's actually real trends, real investment in things that are happening that look like transformation.
Yeah.
What else?
Yeah, I think I'm going to agree with you and disagree with you. I'm going to agree with you once and disagree with you twice.
There you go. Good.
So I'm preparing you for that. So here's my point of agreement. I agree that seeking these kind of experiences would be a wrong thing to do. I think that's the type of divination. And that is throughout the scriptures something we should not do. Seeking visions, seeking dreams, seeking omens of the future. These are pagan things. So I would agree with you that seeking those things are unhealthy. I would never encourage people to try and go into a lucid dream or try and take substances to help them to have spiritual experiences, as people do in all kinds of religions. And many Christians have done the same. I would not encourage any of those things. That I would say falls under divination, and we certainly shouldn't be seeking it. However, where I'm going to disagree is twofold. First, I think, and this is in Acts, it's in Joel, it's in the Law of Moses, when God speaks to his people, the primary way he speaks to them is through visions and dreams. And one of the promises of Joel is that in the last days, which began when Jesus ascended, that the Spirit would be poured out on all people. Young men would see visions, old men would dream dreams. This is more of a fulfillment of the Law of Moses, that they would all become prophets by the Holy Spirit, meaning that God would personally communicate with his people. And the primary way that he would do that in Exodus, in Joel, in Acts is through visions and dreams. We see this in the New Testament. Happens with Paul, happens with Peter. So I do think we have to attend to our dreams. Not that we seek them, but if the Lord's going to communicate to his people, it seems that those would be the primary ways it would happen. So we would want to be attentive to our dreams and kind of learn the lessons of the scriptures. Like if you dream the same dream twice, like Pharaoh did, and it haunts you, then maybe something that you need to pay attention to. Psychologists will tell you maybe it's something in your subconscious you're working out, and that may be true. But other times it also could be God communicating. So we do have to be attentive. And visions are like daydreams. But how many times have Christians had these experiences where they see something in their mind's eye and it feels important to them? They think it's been given to them. So we also have to expect God to speak. Mm-hmm. And there I'm not going to be a materialist and think that really we're going to live a deistic life where we're just going to make our way and not expect any divine intervention of any sort. I'm not going to be that type of a person. So I do think you have to attend to your visions and dreams, but I fully agree you should not seek it. That is a pagan thing, but you should receive it. The God has to take the initiative. And the other thing is, I don't think I agree that a Christian life can really effectively move without direct intervention. I really think we're all going to have stones to take out of the Jordan River. And I think that those will be important moments. And I think during our dry times, I think those can be places where we go back and remember. My grandmother used to call it stones taken from the River Jordan. You might call it a testimony or a witness.
Yeah.
Sometimes, especially during seasons where we can't hear God's voice or we feel very disconnected from him or we feel like he's not fulfilling his promises, sometimes going back to those moments when we felt very close to him, when we felt like he was directly, whether it's an altar experience or a particularly powerful service or a dream or a vision that we had that did bear fruit in our lives, whatever. I think you're going to need those stones. Like, I really think the Bible consistently says that you need to collect the stones when you're crossing through the river. And I think that's what Jacob does here. And I think this is an anchor for him. And I know it sounds like a lack of faith to say that you need these fantastic moments to see you through, but I think you do. When I think of when my parents are treating me in ways I don't like, I have to remember the times they treated me well and put it all together. And so I don't, maybe you're a better man than me. But I oftentimes, when I face my doubts, it is the moments of more direct interaction with God from my past that see me through. I'm going to trust him because in the past this worked out, or because I remember the time that he called me to ministry, and I know that was him. I remember how poignant it is, and no matter how many doubts I have now on whether I'm really following the right road, I'm going to remember the moment when it was clear. So I think maybe I live out of those experiences more than you do, but I'm sort of thinking Jacob needed this. I don't think it's a sign of weakness that he has this in his life. I think he needed it.
Yeah, I guess what let me qualify with
you can disagree with me. This will be fun.
Yeah. Well, I think what I was really getting at wasn't necessarily that people shouldn't have dreams or visions. I often feel like people can self-generate some of that stuff.
Yeah, that's the seeking. That's the seeking stuff.
Discernment, yeah, it's very difficult because I've heard enough people, and I've heard stories about people where there's similarities and such, and I get concerned about people who are constantly talking about that, unless it's been some kind of connection with some spiritual development. Obviously, yeah. I mean, I can't imagine being I have a really hard time imagining that I think it'd be really hard to live in that 400-year period between the last prophet and John the Baptist. But I mean, they needed something to cling to through that difficult time, and I know that when people have that inner assurance that they're able to have been able to serve and able to live through even the most difficult times. Tammy's grandfather used to say all the time that if you're called to ministry, that's going to get you, that call, that's going to get you through the most difficult times. And he certainly saw some very difficult times. He's passed now, but that's certainly, I find that certainly true. There are some things that are very difficult to go through, but without having, to me, I without God, I don't really have much strength beyond that. I mean, motivation. And I know that sounds really pious and stuff, but that's not what I'm trying to get at.
Yeah.
I'm saying that I agree with you saying that from Joel and from Acts, but I think also too that we're in a situation where we have the text to read from, to reference, to work through, and the visions and dreams that we have should be somewhat accountable, should be pretty accountable to the scripture that we have as well. But I also know that what I was trying to get at before is some people are more excited by the ecstasy of those things.
Yeah.
Fascinated by the interpretation of those dreams, even though it might be legitimate messages from God. They're focusing more on the letters, should you say, the story than they could be. The temptation could be.
Here's a passage. It's exactly what you're saying. I just read it today as I finished Colossians, and this is what you're warning against. And I agree with you. Therefore, don't let anyone condemn you. This is Colossians 2:16. Therefore, don't let anyone condemn you in matters of food and drink or observing festivals, new moons, or Sabbaths. These are only a shadow of what is to come, but the substance belongs to Christ. Don't let anyone disqualify you, insisting on self-abasement and worship of angels, dwelling on visions, puffed up without cause by a human way of thinking, and not holding fast to the head, from whom the whole body, nourished and held together by its ligaments and sinews, grows with a growth that is from God. So it's just one example of many passages that warn about getting puffed up with visions and what you're saying, not living out of, when God communicates with us, it's a great experience if he initiates it. And it's a wonderful moment. You and I have been in worship services that we never wanted to leave. Those are wonderful moments, but it doesn't mean that you're more important than another person. And it doesn't mean that that is the normal experience and that you should expect it all the time. If you're given that, it's usually, and this is what I was saying, because the road ahead is going to be very, very difficult and you're going to need it.
Yeah.
So the likelihood is you're not going to have another one of these.
Mm-hmm.
In fact, you'll go through a valley, when Jesus has the vision, when the disciples see him transfigured,
Mm-hmm.
and they see him in his glorified form, and he's talking with Moses and Elijah. That's a vision of the future in many ways.
Mm-hmm.
But they have to come down from that mountain, and the valley that runs between that mountain and Jesus' ascension, when that prophecy is fulfilled, is the cross.
Mm-hmm.
He has to pass through Golgotha before
Mm-hmm.
that becomes a reality. So yes, Paul's point is well taken. Don't celebrate those moments. In fact, those moments are preparatory for very bad moments ahead,
Mm-hmm.
but you'll need them. When you cross through the Jordan River, it's a wonderful moment. Collect the stones.
Mm-hmm.
But you're learning something you'll need because trial is ahead. And so
Right.
again, you don't want to seek those experiences because you will not like what follows them.
Right.
You don't want to be puffed up by those experiences because these are not the normal experiences. This is God's grace to you, but it's not because you're special.
Mm-hmm.
It's God's grace to you. Give thanks. But I still think we need to be expecting God to speak in our time.
Oh, yeah.
And what
Yeah.
he doesn't do is he can speak to our spirits, but that has to be discerned through the word
Mm-hmm.
and through Christian community. And he can speak through visions and dreams. But like you said, there has to be accountability, and there does. And you get a lot of advice scripturally. First of all, Pharaoh knew that his dream was important because he had the same dream twice in two different forms.
Mm-hmm.
So he knew that that was significant. A single dream is not significant. A repeated dream can be. But even Pharaoh couldn't understand it without somebody God had sent. And so that's discernment. And you and I have an additional thing that Joseph did not have, that Daniel did not have. We have the scriptures. So if we think God's communicating with us, it has to be discerned.
Right.
Through the scriptures, through Christian community, and through experience.
Right.
So sometimes it's not even clear what's being said until we enter into it. So I'm sort of affirming what you're saying. You can't live out of these experiences. They shouldn't be sought.
Yeah.
But at the same time, they should be looked for. That's my thing.
I agree with you. I think my nervousness about it is there seems to be so many people today who would like to just bypass all that stuff and say, well, God said this.
Yeah,
This is the vision.
yeah. God will talk to me. I don't need the scriptures. I don't need church. I don't need any community. God speaks to me. I know what he wants, and that's it.
Right.
Yeah, that's called a false prophet, and that is called a cult leader.
I got my own ladder.
Right.
My own Jacob's ladder.
Yeah, I mean, it's always possible because that's the experience prophets had. So if God calls a prophet, they might have that experience. But if you are that person, probably nobody will recognize you till you're dead, and your life's going to be rough.
Mm-hmm.
So, don't expect any respect if that's you. And only God can tell people later whether you were accurate or not. You'll be dead before that happens. So don't seek that, because prophets do look crazy, and they do look like they're the only ones hearing, and that's the way prophets are. That's Jeremiah, that's Ezekiel. There are a few of them in the New Testament too. If you read Acts carefully, you'll see a few people who prophesied famines and things like that. So that's always possible, but that's not the gift of prophecy. It's different.
Mhm.
Yeah. You don't
Right.
want to seek that. That's bad life.
Right.
Bad life. There's nothing quite honorable about that. People put you out. They hate you, persecute you, think you're full of yourself.
Yep.
Nothing good
Yeah.
about that.
The thing too is the this is not the only experience that Jacob has though too. So that's a little foreshadow. Spoiler alert. Sorry about that. He does have other experiences with God that are life transforming.
They are.
So,
They are. And God will communicate with his people. And that's what we want people to expect, but it does have to be discerned. That's a good warning. And if you do think, and actually said this, I actually taught a session for our kids on the story of Joseph and Pharaoh. If you do have a dream that's repeated, there's some self-work to do. Seek it in prayer, bring it to your small group of people who are studying the Bible with you. And sometimes repeated dreams are the subconscious working itself out, things that you're struggling with or decisions you need to make that you haven't. So sometimes there is some of that, but we also know biblically God also will speak to his people in those ways. And so it's a good point of discernment if you have a repeated dream to see if there are any themes in it that resonate with the scriptures, and to talk to other people, have them pray with you and discern whether or not this might be something that God's trying to get your attention. But when God does that, it'll not be about other people, it'll be about you. He's not going to tell you dirt on other people. God is not a gossip. So it's for you. And if he's communicating with you, it'll be likely to prepare you for what's coming or to help you to change direction because you're heading in the wrong direction. That's most typically biblically why dreams are given. In Pharaoh's case, God gave him because cataclysm was coming and he needed to prepare in advance. So God warned him. Dreams are a grace, but they're not a celebrity status, and they're not so that you will know something about somebody else. That's one thing that really bothers me with people who think they have words, and these words are for other people. I don't see a lot of that in the scriptures, folks. Usually if God communicates with someone in this way, it's to redirect them.
Yeah. If
And
it's a
in
word, it
Jacob,
should be. I'm sorry.
No, I was just going to say in Jacob's case, this was a vision about the future of the land he was being given. And so it was to encourage him to return.
Right.
And it's going to work. God never gives these things just FYI, and he's never showing off. God doesn't just do it so you can see how powerful he is, or so that you can feel like you're loved by him. That's not why he does these things. When God communicates, it's because, well, either like Paul, you're going in such a dreadfully wrong direction that if somebody doesn't get your attention, you're dead. Or he's preparing you for a hardship ahead, and he wants you to have a stone from the river that you can hold on to when you pass through the valley of the shadow of death. So, yeah, again, we have to understand why God communicates, but I still think we should be paying attention. Like we do with kids in vacation Bible school. I think every vacation Bible school I've ever done, we would begin the prayer time with, have you had any God incidences? Do you see God at work? It's the same thing. Keep your eyes open. Pay attention. But you can't manufacture these kind of visions. If you do it with drugs, it wasn't real.
Yeah.
Drugs will give you these visions, but they're not real. The real ones only God can give. Yeah. So, but thanks for that little back and forth, Minister Joe. I liked ending it on that. That was good.
Yeah.
We got to both display our sandpapers. Next week, we'll be digging into Jacob's actually arrival in Haran and what happens there. So we'll know why Jacob had this wonderful vision next week when we see just how difficult a road he has to travel ahead of it. Yeah. But when God speaks to you, it's generally for you, and it's mercy. It's usually to give you information that if you didn't have, things could go dreadfully wrong. And I think we do serve a God who still interacts in these ways. The scriptures give you a lot of warnings, but sometimes he has to slap us upside the head.
Right.
And I think he will do that. I don't believe in a deistic God who just sits floating up in the heavens and he doesn't do anything or communicate with us at all. He kind of says, I wrote a book, read it. And that's it. Though it's easy to live that way, it's perilous to live that way because that's how the Pharisees lived. They thought that they had salvation in the book. and they didn't believe in the living God. And so we don't want to be that. And I know you're not, Joe, Minister Joe. I know you're very much on the pious side of things, but I think sometimes you judge yourself too much for that.
Oh yeah.
So I think we serve a living God, and he interacts with us. I think we misinterpret him when we're selfish, or when we're ambitious, or when we're envious. Because if we think what he's doing is telling us about other people's faults, you won't find God having those conversations very much, except with a prophet. But it's not personal. It's very generic most of the time. And you might say, well, what about Nathan? Yeah, Nathan confronted David. You think you're Nathan? Give it a shot.
How did Nathan do after that?
David must have appreciated him because he named one of his sons Nathan. And that son is the one who's in the line of the Messiah. Mm-hmm. It's interesting because it's in the line of David's son Nathan that the physical ancestry of Jesus comes. We see that in Luke. Sure. So, yeah. But I wonder if the son Nathan was before or after that confrontation. I don't know how old he was.
Yeah, he was a friend.
He was a friend. Yeah. But anyway, yeah, you don't want to be Nathan if you don't have to be. Nathan was a court prophet, which means he was hired to have these conversations. He was hired as an advisor. So if you are called to be a Nathan, it means you'll be an advisor already. Like that's why he was there. He was there to help David discern. And so you'll have people like that in your life. And sometimes God will speak to them about you if you've asked them to be part of your discernment team. But if a complete stranger comes up to you, like happened with Jeroboam and the man of God from Judah who comes up and tells him a lot of horrible things, and he was a complete stranger to him, that's a rare occurrence, and that means you're really in a bad place. If God couldn't even find a friend of yours to talk to you, if you had to call some random guy from another tribe, you're in a lot of trouble, man.
Yeah.
But you don't want to be that man of God from Judah. He dies on the way home. So anyway. I know we got into some stuff, huh? But this is good. This is the spiritual stuff. And it's good for us to recognize every now and again that we're not materialists as Christians. We believe there's a material reality and spiritual reality, and they are connected. And we know who connects them. It's Jesus.
Right.